July 3, 1888. A miner's shack near Pinal, Arizona. A woman on a wooden cot. Beside her, a half-empty bottle of laudanum. The coroner records the cause: suicide by opium poisoning. She was 30 years old, and her name was Mattie Blaylock, the common law wife of Wyatt Earp. He was not there. When Hollywood told his story for 100 years, they erased her. The addiction, the bottle. Gone. 18 truths about opium on the frontier that the movies buried. Which one did they work hardest to hide? The American frontier after the Civil War was a place soaked in pain. Hundreds of thousands of wounded veterans drifting west with nothing waiting for them but open ground. No federal drug laws, no prescriptions required, no age limits of any kind. Opium was as legal as flour and cheaper than a glass of whiskey at the worst saloon in Dodge City. Every general store stocked it on the same shelf as the sugar and the coffee. Every doctor on the plains carried it in his black leather bag right beside the bone saw. Every newspaper from St. Louis to San Francisco ran full-page advertisements for medicines laced with it, and not a single one of those papers was required to say what was inside. We are not going to Hollywood for any of this. We are going to the records that survived. The coroner's inquests filed in dusty county courthouses. The territorial pharmacy ledgers that nobody looks at. The newspaper advertisements still sitting in library archives where anyone can read them today. The physicians who tried to warn a country that did not want to hear it. Men like Dr. Alonzo Calkins, who published his study of the opium appetite in 1871 and laid the numbers on the table for anyone with the nerve to look. The paper trail is there. It has always been there. It starts now. Number 18. Opium was completely legal for the entire frontier era. No prescription needed, no age limit enforced, no questions asked at the counter. From the 1840s through 1914, any man, woman, or child in the United States could walk into a general store or pharmacy and buy opium over the counter, the same way you would buy a tin of crackers. The federal government did not regulate the drug trade at all until the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, and even that law only required manufacturers to list ingredients on the label. It did not restrict who could buy. It did not limit how much. It did not protect the buyer in any way. For 70 years, the most addictive substance on the continent moved across countertops with fewer restrictions than a pistol. Every Western you have ever watched takes place inside that reality. Every saloon scene, every homestead, every cavalry outpost. Opium was right there on the shelf, in the bag, in the cabinet. And not once in 100 years of film has a cowboy walked into a general store and bought a bottle of laudanum the way he buys a whiskey at the bar. That purchase happened every day in every town on the frontier. Hollywood erased it. Not because it was rare, but because it was so common that showing it would have cracked the myth wide open. Number 17. Here is how cheap escape really was on the American frontier. A glass of whiskey at a saloon bar cost 10 to 25 cents depending on the town and the year. A single dose of laudanum, which is nothing more than opium dissolved in grain alcohol, cost a fraction of that. The Iowa State Board of Health conducted a pharmacy survey in 1885 and recorded laudanum selling at roughly 25 cents per ounce in small-town drugstores across the state. 1 ounce held about 30 doses. Work that arithmetic, and it comes to less than a penny for a single dose. You could numb yourself for an entire week on what 1 glass of bad whiskey cost at the bar. Whiskey was the escape the whole saloon could see across the room and smell on a man's breath from 3 feet away. Laudanum was the escape you slipped into a coat pocket and carried home without saying a word, to anyone you passed on the street. A farmer's wife living 50 miles from the nearest saloon could afford it on egg money alone. A wounded veteran drawing a half pension could afford it without thinking twice. A girl working the line in Dodge City could afford it on what she earned in a single night. Forget the opium den with its dark curtains and foreign smoke. That is not where the damage was done. The real picture is a plain glass bottle sitting on a kitchen shelf beside the salt box, bought for pennies, legal as the sugar in the bowl, and strong enough to end a life one quiet swallow at a time. Number 16. Dr. George Goodfellow of Tombstone, Arizona, was one of the most capable surgeons the frontier ever produced. He removed bullets barehanded by lamplight on kitchen tables, performed emergency surgery in saloon back rooms, and published medical papers on gunshot trauma that physicians still reference to this day. He was brilliant and he was brave. He also dispensed morphine and laudanum to nearly every patient who came through his door because he had almost nothing else in his bag that worked. No antibiotics existed anywhere on Earth. No effective general anesthesia was available beyond ether and chloroform, which were difficult to transport in the desert heat and carried severe risks. No effective painkillers existed that were not derived from the opium poppy. A frontier doctor treated toothaches, broken bones, difficult childbirths, chronic dysentery, camp fever, snakebite, and the slow grinding agony of grief with the very same substance from the very same bottle. Goodfellow was not careless or reckless. He was trapped inside the limits of his own century's medicine. The black leather bag that saved your life was the very same bag that started your addiction, and the man carrying it across the dust to your door had absolutely no substitute to offer you. When he handed a woman a bottle of laudanum after a brutal childbirth on the open prairie, he was doing the only thing his training allowed him to do. There was simply no way for him to know he was forging a chain she might spend the rest of her short life trying to break. Number 15. The patent medicine companies did not hide in shadows. They worked in broad daylight with their names on the bottle. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, Godfrey's Cordial, McMunn's Elixir of Opium, Dover's Powder, Ayer's Cherry Pectoral, Hamlin's Wizard Oil. Every one of these products contained opium or morphine or both. Everyone was sold over the counter without restriction, and everyone was advertised in the same newspapers that printed church notices and school board minutes. By 1872, United States Treasury Department import records show the country brought in over 500,000 pounds of crude opium in a single year. The overwhelming majority of it went straight into patent medicine sold to ordinary Americans who had no idea what they were swallowing with each spoonful. The companies behind those products fought every attempt at regulation for decades, spending lavishly on advertising in papers whose editors could not afford to lose the revenue. The first real drug dealers on the American frontier did not lurk in alleyways. They had offices and printing presses and sales agents and full-page advertisements in every newspaper in the territory. And they answered to no law because no law existed to answer to. The question I asked at the very start is still open. Which of these truths did Hollywood work hardest to erase? We are not close to the answer yet. Number 14. This entry earns its own number on the list because of the body count. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup contained morphine sulfate and was marketed directly to mothers of infants. The label said it treated teething pain, colic, and fussiness. The advertisements showed plump, smiling babies cradled in their mother's arms. Quiet nights, restful sleep. That was the promise printed right on the bottle. Physicians across the country eventually raised the alarm, and the American Medical Association documented infant deaths tied directly to the product. The British medical journal, The Lancet, published warnings as early as the 1860s. And still the syrup remained on store shelves in parts of the United States until 1930. more than 60 years on the market after the first published warnings that it was killing children. No frontier mother in any Western film has ever been shown reaching for that small brown bottle. But it sat in thousands of cabinets across the frontier, in sod houses and mining camps and cattle ranch kitchens, placed there by exhausted women who had been awake for days and trusted a label that showed a grandmother's face on the front and the word soothing printed in gentle, reassuring letters. The babies who never woke were listed in county records as croup or convulsions or simply the will of Providence. They were never properly counted. No one totaled them up. And the company kept printing the picture of the smiling infant on the advertisement for another full generation. Number 13. The 1897 Sears Roebuck and Company catalog listed a hypodermic syringe kit for $1.50. On the very same pages, beside bolts of calico and cast iron cookware and kerosene lamps, the company offered laudanum and morphine for home use. A homesteader's wife living 50 miles from the nearest settlement could sit at her kitchen table, fill out an order form by lamplight, and receive a complete morphine kit by wagon post, the same way she ordered dress fabric or a new set of dinner plates. Nobody asked what it was for. Nobody verified the name on the order. Nobody checked who opened the brown paper package when it finally arrived at the door. The addiction came through the mail, packed between the dishes and the dress patterns. For those of you whose families homesteaded, think carefully about what may have rested on a high shelf in your great-grandmother's kitchen, not the sourdough crock or the butter churn. The small glass bottle and the tin syringe case, ordered from a page in the back of the catalog, delivered to the door without a single question, and never once spoken of in any family story that survived to reach your ears. The company that helped build rural American life also delivered the thing that was quietly hollowing it out. Number 12. The Civil War was the morphine war. No conflict in history up to that point had used the drug on such an enormous scale. Union and Confederate surgeons injected morphine in field hospitals from Shiloh to Antietam to Appomattox because it was the only reliable answer for the white-hot agony of amputation, the shock of a rifle ball, and the dysentery that killed more soldiers than bullets. Union Army medical records alone document the dispensing of nearly 10 million opium pills and thousands upon thousands of morphine injections over 4 years of war. The men who survived came home with a need they could not name and could not control. The phenomenon became so common and so recognizable that it earned its own term in the medical literature of the time. They called it the Army disease. When those veterans drifted west to the mining camps and cattle towns and railroad construction gangs, the need traveled in their blood. Every Western ever made has a version of this man. The quiet loner at the end of the bar with the hard stare and the hollow look. He was not simply haunted by what he witnessed. He was physically dependent on what the Army surgeon pushed into his arm to keep him alive. Hollywood kept the stare and the silence. It erased the reason behind both. Number 11. Here is the truth that shatters the Hollywood image most completely. Multiple medical surveys conducted during the frontier era found the same stubborn pattern over and over. Dr. Alonzo Calkins in 1871, the Michigan State Board of Health in 1878, the Iowa Pharmacy Survey of 1885. Women made up roughly 60 to 70% of opiate users on the American frontier. The cause was not weakness or moral failing. It was the medicine itself and the way it was delivered. Laudanum was prescribed by frontier doctors for what the medical profession called female complaints, menstrual cramps, the brutal exhaustion that followed childbirth in a country with no hospitals, anxiety and sleeplessness, the grinding isolation of a sod house on the Nebraska plain where the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away and the nearest doctor was a 2-day ride. Physicians prescribed it freely and repeatedly because nothing else in their supply eased the suffering. The minister's wife, the school teacher, the farm mother who put supper on the table every night, she was far more common as an opiate addict than any smoker in any Chinatown den. And she was completely invisible. Her addiction unfolded behind a closed door with a glass bottle and a spoon, and not one person wrote her name in any newspaper until the coroner finally came to the house. You are past the halfway mark now. The names on this list are about to get much larger. And the answer I promised at the start is not what most people guess. Stay with me. Number 10. In cattle towns and mining camps across the frontier, from Dodge City to Deadwood to Virginia City, madams and brothel operators used opium and morphine as a tool of daily control over the women who worked for them. The arrangement was simple and cruel. An addicted woman could not leave. She needed the next dose more urgently than she needed freedom, and the person who controlled the bottle controlled her entirely. This was not rumor or frontier gossip. It appeared in coroner's inquests and local newspaper reports when the women died, which they did with steady and grim regularity. The death records and inquest files of Deadwood and Tombstone hold accounts of young women found in small rented rooms behind the saloons with laudanum bottles at their sides, their deaths noted in a few flat lines of county language and forgotten before the ink had time to dry. Some were teenagers. Some had been in the towns only weeks. Hollywood built the bold, spirited saloon girl with the painted lips and the sharp tongue and the heart of gold underneath it all. She delivers her line, she tosses her hair, she walks off camera, and the story keeps rolling. The real woman behind that comfortable fiction often could not walk anywhere at all. She was held in place not by a locked door, but by a chemical leash she could never pay down, in a town where not one living soul would have lifted a hand to help her try to leave. Number 9. The opium smoking dens in San Francisco's Chinatown, in Virginia City's back alleys, and in the Chinese quarters of a dozen other western towns were, by nearly every surviving first-hand account, quiet, orderly, and almost completely free of violence. Visitors lay on narrow wooden bunks in dim rooms, smoked in near total silence, and left without trouble. Compare that picture to the average frontier saloon on any Saturday night. Louder by a mile, bristling with firearms, far more likely to produce a body before sunrise. The dens were not targeted because they were dangerous to the community. They were targeted because white Americans were walking through the doors. And most alarming to the men who wrote the laws, white women were among them. The San Francisco Board of Supervisors' own 1875 investigation stated the reason in language that left nothing to interpretation. The fear was not opium. The fear was not public health or public safety. The fear was that the races were mixing in a low-lit room on a Chinatown side street. The den became the scapegoat for a crisis that had nothing to do with any den on any back street in any Chinatown in the country. The real epidemic, the one killing far more people, was happening behind white parlor doors and in white kitchens with lace curtains, dispensed by white family physicians who went to church on Sunday and never thought of themselves as part of the problem. But blaming that picture would have meant blaming the very people who were writing the laws and signing the ordinances. Number 8. San Francisco, 1875. The Board of Supervisors passed the Opium Den Ordinance. It was the first anti-drug law in the history of the United States of America. Read what it actually said. It banned the smoking of opium in public dens. That was all. It did not touch laudanum. It did not regulate patent medicines. It placed no restriction whatsoever on morphine or opium in any form consumed by white Americans in any setting, whether bought at a pharmacy counter or delivered by a family doctor. The law targeted Chinese immigrants and their gathering places, and it targeted nothing and nobody else. The supervisor's own published report named white women visiting Chinatown as the primary justification for the ordinance, not the drug itself, not public health or public safety, not the tens of thousands of white citizens already dependent on the identical chemical compound purchased in a different bottle from a different counter on the respectable side of town. The law was a racial instrument dressed in the careful language of civic concern, and the pattern it laid down, punishing the visible foreign user while leaving the invisible domestic user completely untouched and completely unmentioned, would echo through American drug policy for the next 150 years and counting. The comfortable part of this history ends right here. Number 7. Tombstone, Arizona. The single most filmed frontier town in the history of American cinema. Home of the Earps and the Clantons, and the 30 seconds near the OK Corral that became the most retold gunfight in American memory. Tombstone also had a thriving and well-documented opium trade. The Chinese quarter, called Hoptown, sat within easy walking distance of the Oriental Saloon and the gambling halls on Allen Street. Laudanum moved through the cribs and the back rooms as freely as rot-gut whiskey. Both the Tombstone Epitaph and the Tombstone Nugget printed references to opium trade and use in their pages. Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and every other famous name in the Tombstone saga lived and worked within a few hundred yards of an active daily opium market. Not one single film about that town has acknowledged any of this. Not My Darling Clementine in 1946. Not Gunfight at the OK Corral in 1957. Not the 1993 Tombstone that put Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell on every screen in America and became the Western a whole generation remembers best. In every version, the opium is gone. The Chinese quarter is gone. The laudanum bottles are gone. The most famous frontier town in the movies was scrubbed clean for the camera, and that scrubbing began decades before the very first frame was ever shot. We are in the final stretch now. The names cannot get any bigger than this. And the question I planted at the beginning is about to be answered. Number 6. Mattie Blaylock. We are back where this story began. She was born in Iowa around 1857. She met Wyatt Earp in the late 1870s and traveled the frontier at his side through one rough town after another. By the time they settled in Tombstone, she was already using laudanum. When Earp took up openly with Josephine Sarah Marcus, Mattie was simply left behind. She drifted south to Pinal, a hard little mining camp in the Arizona desert, and lived alone in a wooden shack with almost nothing to her name. On July 3, 1888, she swallowed enough laudanum to stop her heart. The coroner's jury ruled it a suicide. She was 30 years old. She was buried in a grave that was never given a stone. Across a full century of Hollywood films about Wyatt Earp, Mattie appears as a ghost at best. A brief mention, a dim silhouette in the background. The laudanum is never shown. This was not carelessness or oversight. It was a deliberate decision. A real woman with a documented name and a recorded death was removed from the most famous frontier legend ever told, because her pain did not serve the story of the man Hollywood chose to celebrate. The bottle on her table is the single detail the movies could never afford to let you see. Number 5. John Henry Holliday was diagnosed with tuberculosis in his early 20s. He lived with the disease for roughly 15 years while it ate him alive from the inside out. He coughed blood into his handkerchief until no amount of laundering could take the stain from the cloth. His body wasted month after month until his suits hung loose on a frame that had once been strong. He sought treatment from physicians in Dodge City, in Tombstone, and finally in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, where he died in a hotel bed on November 8, 1887. He was 36 years old. In the 1880s, the standard and virtually the only medical treatment for the relentless coughing and the bone-deep chest pain of advanced tuberculosis was laudanum or morphine. There was nothing else a doctor could offer. No surviving document names the exact date Holliday first accepted a dose. But the circumstantial evidence is as heavy as the historical record ever gets for a private medical matter. A man in his condition, in that era, under regular medical supervision from trained physicians, was receiving opiates. It is as close to certain as history allows without a prescription slip in hand. The most famous man at the most famous gunfight in the history of the American frontier was in all probability under the influence of an opiate when the firing erupted on Fremont Street in Tombstone. Hollywood gave us a sharp-eyed, razor-tongued, fearless Doc Holliday. The real man was dying one cough at a time, and the medicine keeping him on his feet was the same substance quietly destroying the lives of thousands of ordinary people all around him. Number 4. Judges, preachers, school teachers, lawyers, military officers, farmers' wives who never missed a Sunday service or a quilting bee. The Iowa Pharmacy Survey of 1885 did not find addiction hiding in the dens or crouching in the saloons. It found addiction in parlors, in parsonages, and in the clean kitchens of respectable homes. The majority of opiate addicts across the American frontier were white, middle class, and obtained their supply not from some dark corner, but from the family doctor or the drugstore counter on the main street of town. They did not smoke opium in a dim room. They swallowed laudanum from a glass bottle in a house with curtains on the windows and a Bible on the shelf. The opium den was the picture the nation chose to fear. The actual epidemic looked absolutely nothing like that picture. It looked like your neighbor walking home from church. It looked like a woman sitting in a pew on Sunday morning who could not get through the sermon without the small brown bottle tucked carefully into her handbag. And because the real face of addiction looked exactly like respectability itself, nobody holding any authority was willing to call it by its proper name. 3 entries left. The answer is nearly here, and I will tell you plainly, it is not the one most people expect. Number 3. Listen carefully to this sequence and tell me if it sounds familiar. Overprescription by well-meaning physicians who had no other tool to offer patients in pain. A legal, completely unregulated supply chain controlled by corporations that fought every attempt at oversight with money and political pressure and teams of lawyers. Addiction concentrated most heavily among 2 groups, women and military veterans. A scapegoat population punished harshly for the visible version of a crisis that was everywhere and invisible. And then a delay of decades, an entire generation of inaction before any meaningful federal regulation was signed into law. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 arrived roughly 40 years after medical professionals first documented the epidemic in published, peer-reviewed surveys. 40 years of knowing and not acting. Today, the Centers for Disease Control reports that over 75,000 Americans die each year from opioid overdoses. The pharmaceutical companies that drove the modern prescriptions fought regulation at every turn. The earliest victims were patients who trusted their own family doctors. The pattern of this century did not merely echo the 1880s. It repeated them, step for step, decade for decade, grave for grave. And not one person standing in a position of power said, "We have seen this exact thing before," because the first time it happened had been carefully, thoroughly removed from the national story. Number 2. The Motion Picture Production Code, enforced from 1934 through 1968, explicitly restricted the depiction of drug use in American films. Will Hayes, the man who created and administered that code, presided over the single greatest era of Western filmmaking in the history of motion pictures. Every John Wayne cavalry charge across Monument Valley, every showdown at high noon under a blazing white sky, every clean, square-jawed frontier marshal who never once reached for anything stronger than a cup of black coffee. All of it, hundreds of films across 3 decades, was produced under a rigid set of industry rules that made it virtually impossible to put an opium bottle, a morphine syringe, or an addicted frontier woman anywhere on the screen. By the time the code finally loosened its grip in the late 1960s, the image of the American West was fixed in the national imagination like a fossil set in limestone. The clear-eyed gunfighter who never flinched, the strong, silent homesteader who never faltered, the brave marshal with nothing but a badge and a Bible and a clean conscience. No laudanum on the shelf, no needles in the dresser drawer, no Mattie Blaylock dying alone on a cot in a desert mining shack. The Hayes office was not a conspiracy against history. It was an industry following rules it designed to protect its own profits and its own audience. And the result was a portrait of the American frontier so vivid and so complete that it replaced the documented, recorded truth in the memory of an entire nation. Number 1, and it is not the one you were expecting. The frontier opium epidemic killed more Americans than the gunfights ever did. It broke more families than the cattle wars. It buried more women than the worst winters on the northern plains. And it was not lost to time or faded by neglect. It was taken out of the story on purpose. The national myth demanded a frontier built on grit and courage and clear-eyed self-reliance. Admitting that the pioneers were in constant pain, that they treated that pain with a substance they could not understand, that the companies selling it fought with every dollar to keep it legal, and that the government refused to act for 4 full decades even after the evidence was plain for any honest reader to see. All of that threatened the very foundation of the story America needed to believe about its own beginning. So the truth was set aside. And then, one full century later, the country walked the exact same road again. The same overprescription, the same corporate resistance to every proposed regulation, the same scapegoating of the powerless, the same political stalling, the same quiet graves. The most disturbing truth about opium on the American frontier is not any single death or scandal on this list. It is that the forgetting was deliberate. And the price of that deliberate forgetting was paid by an entire new generation of Americans who never knew the lesson had already been written in coroner's ink, in pharmacy ledger books, in the unmarked graves of women and veterans and children whose names nobody thought worth saving. The Hollywood West and the documented West have been sitting side by side now through this entire video. Look at them both. On one side, clean hands, clear eyes, square jaws, and moral certainty. A frontier where pain was something a man pushed through and a woman endured in silence, and nobody ever reached for a bottle they could not put back down. On the other side, the real one, laudanum on the kitchen shelf, morphine in the doctor's bag, a syringe kit ordered from the Sears catalog, and a bottle resting on a dead woman's nightstand in a shack in the Arizona desert. That gap between those two pictures was not an accident of passing time. It was built piece by people with names and motives that are on the public record. The dime novelists who made Wyatt Earp a knight and struck Mattie Blaylock from the page. The patent medicine corporations that spent more on newspaper advertising than most frontier towns earned in a full year and buried every regulation bill before it ever reached a vote. Will Hayes and the Production Code Office, whose rules stripped every single trace of opium from the most popular film genre in America for 34 unbroken years. None of them conspired with one another. Each followed its own interest and its own profit. And the total result was the most complete act of historical erasure in the story of American popular culture. The deadliest truth on this list was never a name or a body count. It was the silence. The frontier told us who it was, in ledgers, in inquests, in bottles on nightstands, in rooms where nobody came. We chose not to listen. And Mattie Blaylock is still out there in the Arizona dirt, in a grave nobody marked, holding the one truth Hollywood could never afford to tell. She lived inside the most famous legend in the American West, and the legend had no room for a woman with a laudanum bottle and nowhere left to go.